There are simpler cameras. There are more complicated cameras. They have different abilities, but ultimately they end up doing the same things. They help us see. I tried putting these two cameras head to head, and I got distracted by the inconsistent formulation of Polaroid film. I think we learned important things about both cameras in that video, but it kind of went a little off the rails, I think. Anytime I try to get too technical or compare the minutia of different tech specs on gear, I end up failing miserably because it's just not my bag. But what is my bag? Well, Double Negative, a photography podcast by Will Malone, with your host, me, the titular Will Malone. I have now used the Polaroid I-2 and the Polaroid Flip extensively. Now, to be fair, I've actually used the Polaroid I-2 much more extensively than the Flip, but I've got the gist of both of them, I think, at this point. And I've determined that they are both for very different things, and that one is not the killer of the other. Everyone's so quick to ask, is something a whatever killer? Maybe just because it's clickable or whatever. And I think that's a false premise in this case. Let's start by talking about the Flip. I keep saying this very one specific thing on this podcast and to people in real life when asked about the Flip. Basically, that I don't have to think about it. I just shoot. I don't have to fidget with it. I just turn it on and I take a photo. It just works. And I've said this over and over again now, like constantly. I keep finding myself saying it. But I gotta ask myself, is this a good thing? It's the same thing I feel about this camera and this one, and this camera over here. But would I use those cameras for any sort of in-depth work or client work or anything like that? Probably not. I'd probably lean more on something like these. And I'm not really using Polaroid cameras for client work, yet at least. But you get what I'm saying. Solving technical problems for a client shoot requires knowledge of the camera. I have to think about the settings, its capabilities, and how it can work with my goals for the subject in front of me. And I've actually had a couple of you message me that you got a Flip and you felt nothing when shooting it. Like, it doesn't feel fun, it just feels like a non-event of some kind. And I 100% get what you're saying. I feel nothing when I use the Flip as well, but not in a bad way, but in a way that seasoned photographers aren't super familiar with. Photographers and photography enthusiasts want to think about the camera. We just like cameras. We like tweaking them, nerding out, and just playing with them. We like the thought of a camera. We like it in our hands. Which is why the Polaroid I-2 is still somewhat alluring, despite the Polaroid Flip's existence. The Polaroid I-2 may swing a little too far in the finicky and have to be thinking about it direction, and many in the Polaroid fix-it world are kind of frustrated by the internal engineering of the thing, and I get it. It's not for those that really like to wrench on their cameras. But I spent the last year and a half making some of my best and, quite frankly, my favorite art I've ever made, all with the Polaroid I-2. I think our cameras, like it or not, are often the subject, in a way, of our photos. The more stylistic, the more unique looking, the more obvious it is that a camera was used to attain a certain image. Gear matters in photography, 100%. The trick is to tame how much it should matter and when. Obviously, it depends on who we want to be looking at our work. If we want an audience full of other photographers, then the more camera that's involved in our images, the better, because photographers love cameras. If we want to try to go to another level and reach a more civilian population, then we need to be leaning on more subject matter, I think. And we need to make sure that whatever we do brings more attention to the scene, context, or person that we're photographing. And the Polaroid Flip is a subject matter machine. It doesn't get in the way. It can't. There's only like 3 buttons on it. You open it and you take a photo. That's it. And I found that when I post my Polaroids on my everyday instant Instagram account, that I get the question, did you shoot this with the Flip? And I think that's because there's no way to really tell. Because the Flip, when taking photos, it doesn't exist. Everything ends up being about the photo you're shooting. The Polaroid I-2, however, imposes itself on every photo you're taking. For better or worse. You have to think about it. You have to notice it. This leads to another question about Polaroid in general. It's kind of weird to talk about a pro Polaroid versus a more point-and-shoot amateur-style Polaroid camera, because the medium of Polaroid in 2025 at least is kind of meant to be somewhat unserious. And as a result, we tend to judge every Polaroid camera on a little bit of a curve. But just like we wouldn't compare a Nikon D850 to a small Olympus point-and-shoot camera, why are we so quick to want to compare the I-2 and the Flip? Because Polaroid as a medium is just fun, no matter how you slice it. It's hard to turn anything you do with a Polaroid camera into work, even if you somehow slot it into your professional workflow. It lightens up the mood. So oftentimes, pulling out a somewhat quirky but involved camera like the Polaroid I-2 kind of feels like overkill. Feels like a little much. But people like me, a photographer/photography enthusiast, like it or not, we are, by definition, a little much ourselves. I'm serious about all this stuff, and I like a little more control. I tend to enjoy when a camera imposes itself on my work because I like the process. But sometimes I get sick of everything being about photography all the time. Sometimes I just want to look around and capture what's there and not really have to think about settings and all that stuff. Polaroid Flip is this. The Polaroid I-2 is this. And all of these cameras ultimately are meant for the same thing. It just depends on what kind of photographer you are. But I have a new philosophy about photography, I think, just in general. I actually believe that I think most photographers should be using simpler cameras. I think we overcomplicate too quickly, and that holds back our work. I learned so much from when, in 2024, I took a Polaroid every single day for a year. I did a 365 project on Polaroid. There's tons of videos about that if you want to, check those out. I'll drop the playlist link in the description. For instance, I used to be really afraid of flash when it comes to photography. I was also kind of intimidated by all the settings on my digital cameras and my more professional gear. And I've always kind of been a little intimidated by the menus on these cameras because a lot of these digital cameras that I started with were kind of overcooked. Had a lot of stuff you didn't need. And I think adopting Polaroid cameras every single day for a year, putting them in my daily workflow, putting so much time into just a simpler camera, having to get a simple camera to go so much farther than it's supposed to go, helped me wrap my head around these more complicated cameras. And I was still intimidated by flash and settings and all that while still being, a decade into photography. But after this Polaroid 365 project, I started using flash all the time. I use it constantly now for professional jobs and for fun. I'm just not afraid of it anymore. 14 years into photography and I was afraid of using external lights, and then shooting with the Polaroid I-2 every day for a year helped me get over that. Advanced photographers should go backwards. It's good for us. Beginner photographers should go forwards, I think. I think everybody needs to be just starting simpler. So many people jump the gun when they have a little extra cash and buy a camera that's like way too much for them, when they should really just buy a point-and-shoot camera and get used to using it and understand not only just what the camera does, but also their own point of view. There's a lot to be said for just kind of going in order and kind of starting slow. I think starting off with too fancy or advanced of a camera can really bog us down and keep us from getting better. It gets in our way. So ultimately, where do I sit with these cameras? I think if you really need to figure out what you're doing with Polaroids and photography, you really need to figure out what you're looking for, figure out what you're trying to do, then I think the Flip is really great for that. I think it's a great way to start. I think it's a great way to figure out what you're all about when it comes to capturing images. But if you know what you're after and you kind of need to work more in the margins, the Polaroid I-2 is great for that. Would I replace one with the other? No, I don't think so. I'm pretty glad to have them both. That's right. I just did the thing. I did the thing that the movie did. You just got Martha'd. Polaroid I-2 v Flip, Batman v Superman. No one's going to win. It ends with everybody coming together and becoming friends because their mom has the same name. I think that makes a lot of sense. And Instax is Lex Luthor, obviously.